And so basically it just starts from the 15th century and it goes like 16th, 17th, and 18th century. And for the 15th century, it said that there was evidence that in some of the writings that are from that time that about 40% of court witnesses were recorded as literate, and in 1533, literacy rate was about 50% among some classes of people. And also one modern estimate that is on Shakespeare's London, it says that between third and a half of people were literate. And also in Elizabethan times, there was a higher level of literacy among women than at any other time until later 19th century. It is at least certain that growing commercial life of the nation required men of merchant class to read and write English in order to transact business and keep records and also interpret legal documents. And because of that, learning to read the vernacular increased in 15th and also 16th century, and a wide diversity of classes were able to read the vernacular. But at the same time, although like the writers were like writing more in vernacular and they were actually like writing in English, and people were like could read English by the time that they got to 16th century, but the contemporary writers were like kind of apologizing for their use of English, and because they considered English as an inferior language, and they refer to it as unskillful and unacquainted with the Latin tongue, and also unlettered. So so they didn't really like it, but because people could read in it, they were like practicing it. And by Henry VIII time, there was schools called petty schools, also ABC schools and Sunday schools, and there were also some schools called grammar schools or classical schools that like actually taught like Latin grammar, and those schools were like specific to like certain classes of people that like were like nobles or like were of gentle birth or something, but like boys that were like very bright but were from aristocracy or tradesman class were able to get into those schools if they were like very bright. And at those time, church had control over like all the schools, and by the middle of 16th century, the church control over the schools was stopped, and when that happened, like laymen and like other people were also able to become teachers, and the teachers didn't have to go through like church. Uh, also like all these like things that they're talking about are about people who lived in big towns and people who lived in country. Most of them were like not literate because like the lifestyle that they had didn't even require them to like learn to read and write, and like even if they were illiterate, they like they wouldn't have any problem, like they could have lived their lives and like nothing would happen. And even the children that like learned to read and write didn't really get to exercise those talents later in life for the people who lived in the country. And then another thing that this writing really talked about was like how books were acquired by people and how books were like available for them. And during the 16th century, books were not really easily acquired, and the production of books were artificially limited in several ways. One of the ways that there was the restriction of the number of the printers, because they didn't have like that many printers. Yeah, and the book trade was also restricted, so there wasn't like a whole lot of trade going on at that time. And the people who had more privilege were able to like get books because of their privilege, because they were able to like order books and get them. By the 17th century, the reading habit was getting a little bit more spread around for people in the middle class, and there was a increased demand for books, but books were still not very easy to acquire for people, but it was like a little better than the 16th century. And there was also like this limit of how many number of copies a book could have had. Like some books were like limited to 15,000 copies. Some books were like 3,000 copies, and like books that were like Bible or had like some like this kind of value to them were like grammar books or things like that were like allowed to be copied more, but like books that didn't have that kind of value weren't as copied as compared to other books. But generally the information that they have on like printing press or like books from like 16th and 17th century is a little bit sketchy, and there's a lot of speculation going on about it because they're not sure about it. They're just like getting this information from certain books that were written on that. And this reading also talked a lot about the cost of the books. And basically what it said about the cost of the books was that during the 15th, 16th, and 17th century, like books weren't like that expensive, but they were pretty expensive, but not like very, very expensive for like. And then it brings like some examples for like people who were privileged or like were of noble families. They were able to access those books because it wasn't like that expensive for them. But for people who didn't have those kind of professions or were like ordinary men, they were only able to afford the cheapest books, and even not many of those. And there's also this example that says that for example, if an ordinary man wanted to buy a book, they had to spend between a quarter to half of his day's earning to buy that book, and it was a little too much for those people. And it also did a comparison with like how much a dinner would cost, and it would be like if you buy a book, it would cost you 2 dinners. So like it was a little too much for ordinary people to buy books. And then it goes to the 18th century, and it says that in 18th century prices of books rose again, and they don't really know why, but people's income also increased a little bit, but like not as much. So because of all this, possession of books was limited to members of people who were members of higher middle class. And it also says that because the printing trade was concentrated in London, the transportation and communication was still primitive, so that other provinces of England and people who lived in the country didn't have access to books as much as they wanted to. For the second part of this reading, they talk about like how there was two things about a book that was like really valued between like people, and also like between like basically everyone. And it was two things. First of all, it was that if the book had like any religious text in it or had any religious value, and the second one is that was it like some type of books that like taught you it's like something that could have made you money. It was like a commercial money getting business type of book. And if a book was like one of those two things, a business book or like a religious book, it was more valued, and like people would like buy it more and things like that. But books that were like I don't know, story books or like creative writing books or like journals or things like that weren't valued as much. And and there was also this group of religious people called the Puritans, who had a lot of influence on what was written and what people read back then. And the Puritans, like they wanted like religious texts to be like the most valued text of all, and they were kind of like successful at making people and common readers believe that. And there was this paragraph that said that even the Puritans that believe that religious text is like the most valued type of text, they use reading the Bible as some sort of imaginative stimulation and satisfaction that that would give to them. And because like Bible can be imaginative and emotional, and it can also has like a narrative style to it. So even though they said that like those type of imaginative like writing is not valued, what they were practicing with Bible was exactly that. And after that, like the effect of like beliefs of Puritans on readers and also like books kind of vanished. And then it's that, like, yeah, I don't think there's like anything more to add to this one. Yeah. So do you guys have any questions of this reading, the Altic reading? Are you guys asleep?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute.
Just like going on and on.
I didn't really have any questions for this one. I don't really know what to ask.
The only question that I had was that why did they value like religious reading and like business reading so much, and like they didn't value like other sorts of reading or other sorts of book as much? Because like I think other types of books like novels or like journals or like any type of books is like valued as much as like religious books, and I don't know why like they insisted on that, but yeah.
I
I'm
think
just
it.
guessing like, oh yeah, you can
Oh
go.
no, you could go ahead.
I'm just guessing like as a very simple answer, like at that time they probably didn't value reading for pleasure. Like that wasn't
Yeah,
their first source of like entertainment, I guess. Like, yeah.
I would say that maybe at that time they were more focused on what was like practical and pragmatic, because they were more focused on like developing their societies and becoming better and discovering science and whatever. Whereas now we kind of were so developed that we all, or some people, want an escape, so they use reading for that.
But wouldn't they prefer scientific text instead of like?
Or, well, sorry, I'm just saying, considering the time, like politics and all that, maybe they're developing a bit more and creating stronger institutions and like rhetoric around these things.
Yeah, like I definitely see where you're coming from, but like I think I don't know about the pushing the religious text, but like for business, for me it seems like.
Sorry, yeah, I was thinking of the business. I should have clarified.
Yeah, but anyways, for business, it seems like maybe just the common people wants to learn how to make money. Like I think at the end of the day, everyone just wants to make a living, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. They're probably also focused on like, yeah, how can I provide for myself and my family, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah. As for the religious thing, I feel like we kind of always go back to this discussion where religion is just their source of, I don't know, stability or whatever it is. Maybe. I don't know what you guys think, but
Sorry, I'm typing right now.
Oh, I'm recording this right now, by the way, so I could post it after if we need to.
Yeah, I'm just making some notes.
Okay.
So was your question, why did they focus so much on religious and like political and business texts? Is that what you said?
yeah, I mean, I get like even in the reading it said that reading was like associated with improvement, so like it was like more important for people to like cultivate a set of virtues and like be able to do some things like in the business part, and also like get more religious and get more like near to God. But like I think if they focus more on the like pleasure side of reading, then people would be more into like learning to read, and maybe more people would have become literate. And like basically the question that I had was like, why didn't they thought of that? Like, yeah.
I feel like at the time, because everyone was so rooted in religion, I don't think that, I feel like for them, the idea of like enjoyment of life or pleasure wasn't necessarily a priority, because it was more about like serving God, or how can I be a better person so that I can go to heaven, stuff like that. I think they just thought very differently from how
Yeah, they
people
probably
do
just had
now.
a different priority.
Yeah, I don't even.
Just needed to like survive and like
Yeah.
make
Yeah,
food or
it's just
whatever.
everything is about like how can I be morally good.
Yeah, I think their way of life was just very simple to them.
Yeah, I agree. I actually agree with that because like right now we're like so obsessed with like what's pleasurable.
What feels good?
Like
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back then they
What
were
makes us
just like
happy or whatever.
yeah.
You know what else?
So if you guys don't have any questions, I can go to the next reading. But if you have like, I can stick to this one.
I think we can move on to the next one now.
I try to
You
keep the
come
next
back
one
like
shorter. So yeah,
13
so you guys would have fallen asleep. Okay. The next one is about the early modern print culture, and it actually like starts with defining the print culture, and it says that it's an umbrella term for like 4 different I don't know the word for it. Yeah, 4 different definitions of like what print culture is. And the first one is that it's a noetic world or consciousness constructed through print. The second one is that print culture is the industrial relationship of book production and distribution. And the third one is that print culture is a body of practices arising from the social relationship of reading and information management. And the last one is that print culture is a specialized field of study within a wider discipline of communication. And then it starts explaining what each one of them actually means through the reading. And before like doing that, it explains a little bit that whenever we're talking about like books or print culture from a historical perspective, we just like get so lost into like different dates and like what percentage of people did this or that in that specific time, that we actually forget that what that print culture meant for people who were like living at that time. And it and in the reading it said that that's not like a positive thing. Uh, so so the first one that it talks about is that is about the impact of print culture on people, and it says that when we're talking about the impact of print culture as like the first one, which is like that print culture creates a noetic world or like or consciousness constructed through print. So it talks about consciousness, and when it talks about that, it's like it talks about a private experience that people have through like reading or like experiencing text. And so so it talks about how when like in classical ages, at first like it was important for you to be literate and be able to read, but when time went on and more people became literate, it became a matter of numeracy. And like the print culture, like what's happening right now, there's like thousands of books like printed every year, like there's like so much information that we won't be able to like read all of them and like know all of them. And so there's like some kind of information overload that is happening within the print culture. and also like and some sort of information explosion. And it says that we should note that this could also manifest itself through saturating a particular narrow interest band with so much material that wider perspectives were neglected. And then it brings this argument that like human mind has always been subject to overload, and like there's always this like some sort of sensory overload at every time, and of like even now that we're sitting, we have a lot of information coming through our sensory I don't know the word for it, but yeah, we're like having a lot of sensory information coming through us, but like we have like this mental filters so that we know which information is the most important one, so that we would like only pay attention to that. And then it talks about like how the same thing can happen through the print culture, and how like we can have like a lot of information coming to us through print culture, but like maybe we have like this kind of mechanisms within us that can choose which information is most important. But then it says that this kind of view is not like that because it's like very complex, and it kind of goes into like the psychology and how your brain works, and like things like that, and consciousness and things like that. So it's not explored as much. Then okay, so then it starts asking the question that in what way is print a culture, and why do we call it like a culture? And then it talks about how culture is a modality of consciousness and a structure of beliefs and perceptions, and a socially constructed subjectivity. And then it talks about like a generalized print consciousness as an object of study. And then it says that it is by seeing it in disjunctive relation to other forms of communicated consciousness, particularly those attributed to oral culture, scribal culture, electronic culture, and all other sorts of cultures. And then it talks about how when print culture was introduced, there was a shift from like going from sound to visual space. So like before that, people mostly communicated through talking to each other and hearing what another person has to say. But when like we're reading a book silently, instead of like hearing, you have to like visually see that and like understand it, and that's a different form of consciousness. And it said that by doing that, it seems that there's a reduction of language to a thing-like status, with a consequent commodifications of the word, and also a reduction of living knowledge to cold non-human facts, and the imposition upon discourse of a sense of closure, and the replacement of speech-like sense to present characteristics of handwritten text with mechanistic impersonality. And it says that the sum of all these things, like these changes that happened, creates a noetic world. And what I got from like this part of the reading was that the writer was kind of like talking about like the negative sides of like books and the print culture, and how it kind of takes us away from that firsthand experience of like having um, a conversation with someone. And that was that. And the second part of this reading talks about print culture as a culture of social relationship. And it says that print culture viewed from this perspective is a sequencing of actors and activities which can be modeled as a continuously evolving, ever-repeating cycle in which each set of events is linked sequentially to a predecessor set and a successor set. And more distantly with the predecessor and, oh my God, I can't read that sentence, that's too hard. Okay, anyway, so it says that the print culture is like in the view that says that is a culture of social relationships, it's a cycle. And then it says that because it's a cycle, it shouldn't have like any beginning or an end. But then it starts like talking about like how it would be created initially. And it says that the initial movement of the warehouse to the bookseller shop to the customer might only be like the first step of this cycle, so that the book is created and then it goes from the warehouse to the bookseller and then it comes to your home. And then he said that the next step of this cycle is the consumption of the book. And it's when you like read the book or like learn something from the book and you consume the book. And after the stage of consumption, which is like associated with the history of reading and like how much people read back then, there comes the field of scholarship, that like when you consume a book or many books, then you can like enter the field of scholarship and you can become a scholar if you like get all that information. And then it mentions again that because it's a cycle, it doesn't have any beginning or an end, but it also says that at the end of the cycle, you would go towards the authorship and you would become an author. And then it talks about print authorship as it emerges from the fourth stage, takes its particular character from being directed towards the requirements of the press and the market served by the press. Other kinds of authorship, like oral or theatrical, are governed by other requirements. And then it says that before this process of physical production begins again, there has to be a further stage of commissioning and enabling, which in the early modern period was conducted principally by booksellers and is now the responsibility of publisher and agents. Our cycle then, in its crudest form, is one of the physical production leading to distribution and sale, leading to consumption and reception, and then leading to reconstitution, leading to authorship, leading to enabling, leading us back to printing, but as a part of a process that is evolutionary as well as repetitive. So basically, the important thing is that this part had was that this cycle of like creating a book and like reading it and like writing it, and like this whole cycle is like can bring us a culture of social relationships, because in each stage of this cycle there's like certain social relationships between people that create that cycle. The next part is that talks about print as a culture of communication, and it says that print culture is a part of a larger informational entity which originates in a perception of the relationships between transmitter and receiver. So this is about like communication, and it says that the study of early modern print as communication would need to invoke a geography of information. This would require consideration of the ways in which information moved by the print shop. What happened? Esther isn't here. So should we add Esther?
Was she the? Did she make the thing?
Oh no,
No?
Oh.
Okay, so
she's
I
joined.
can go. Oh, okay. So this was talking about the communication, and then it talks about the distribution of the books, and how this distribution matters, because like without that distribution, there wouldn't be a print culture. And so the initial movement of the book from the warehouse to the bookseller and to everyone, and the whole geography is like very important in this sense. And it says that it also it both has a geography and also a sociology, and the social formations emerges from the relationships of distribution in bookshops, which were also meeting places in libraries, in learned societies, and through formal and informal book clubs. And these relationships of consumption are another aspect of the cycle of print culture. But in the but it can also be socially extended beyond that culture of print, because it's like those bonds and those communications that are created there can like go on after that. And then okay. Then it talks about print culture. It actually like repeats a part of the, yeah. Then it talks about print culture as communication, and then it puts like, it says that the important part here is how the ways that the information is moved, and like the information is moved through what channels or mediums, and at what range or speed, or routes, or like what vehicles is used to like move this information and these books. And here it says that when we're studying this through history, we have to like put our concentration on like specific things. And like one of them is that like we should know that the concentration of print production is like usually in bigger cities, and like it doesn't happen in like other types of like smaller cities. And that has an effect on the whole communication cycle. And it says that this specific type, that big cities were responsible for like printing and distributing books, was a thing that happened mostly in England, but like in German or Italy, it was a little bit different. And books were like distributed through annual fairs that were held at specific places, and so more people were like able to access those. And it says that this like centralization around the urban areas was one of the weaknesses of early print culture, but it was also one of its strengths, because it allowed the information to be centralized, and around like new economies, but the weakness was that it was like centralized, and like not everyone could like access that information. And then like it goes on and says that print culture can mean a number of very different things. And when we talk about print culture, we have to specifically say that which part of print culture we're talking about. And like usually when we're studying print culture, we do not like talk about every aspect, and we usually like just stick to like this historical aspect or like the communication aspect, and we forget about like the consciousness or like the social relationship or cultural parts of uh, uh, the print culture, and those are also like as important when you want to do that. And that's it. That's everything. If you guys have any questions.
Did anyone come up with questions?
If you guys have any questions, if you don't have any questions from this reading.
I don't have any from this one. Yeah, I have one for the next.
I don't know, like this reading was really dense.
Yeah, this reading was really dense, and like especially the part that talked about like the noetic world and the consciousness part, like I didn't understand like anything.
Like
Yeah.
like the consciousness part about the overload I understood, but then like when he got deeper into it, I just like, what is going on?
Yeah, I think like the problem with this reading was that like there was a lot of ideas that he wanted to like put into a short reading, and he didn't have enough space to explain each one of them completely. So like, yeah, it was a little hard to understand.
Well, like I had to read like this sociology paper for another course, and it was talking about like life in the city, like in life in the city compared to like the countryside, and it was talking about how like people who live in the city have their senses attacked like constantly with their surroundings, just sounds, sights, lights, just new things every day, that like people become kind of like numb to these things because we're constantly being stimulated. And then so we kind of just develop this like nonchalance about everything. And then I guess he was like talking about some like you develop like a choice for what you read or something.
Yeah.
So I guess like with that like overload of print culture, like we start to, I don't know, like don't we always like define which books are more important than others, or like which ones we want to read more, or is that just
I mean, I think we do define it, but like nowadays we do it on a personal like level. Like if I like, I don't know, historical books, I'm gonna like read them more. And it's not like before that they just like forced everyone to read what they thought was the best. I don't know.
I feel like there's still some level of like books that are like a hierarchy of books. And maybe now it has more to do with like celebrity culture. So
Yeah.
authors
think
can
now
become
it's-
famous and yeah. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, they don't force us now, but they are like by commercializing some certain types of like books, maybe they are forcing us
Yeah,
without us knowing it.
yeah. I don't know if you guys like want to try to figure out questions for this, or if you want to just talk about the next one.
I think we can start on the next one, unless you have questions, Scott. Yeah, sorry.
No, I was still thinking,
Oh, okay.
but we can move on.
I thought that like we'll
You
move
guys
on
wanna-
and then
yeah.
if we have
Oh.
questions, we'll come back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unless you think of something in the next few seconds. All right. I will try to summarize this shortly. Okay, so basically the reading started with like a reference to Machiavelli and his reading habits, I guess, and his records of how he read, and the reading kind of used this to go into like the different forms of reading described from that time period. So he was described as, I guess, having two forms of reading, and one was more for pleasure and relief from difficulties at the time, and the other was more so for lessons to guide a government in crisis or to explain the failure of an army. And these two different types of readings came in different physical forms. So one was like a pocket-sized octavo, which came in both Latin, and they were printed in an italic type. And then the other were, I think, larger, like folio types, and it was described as like the way he read it was that these great men were speaking to him, and he was kind of just like gaining wisdom from these readings. So from the 1960s forward, scholars paid increasing attention to the physical and aesthetic development of books in early modern Europe, and humanists demanded, produced, and consumed new kinds of books as well as new canons of text. And then it goes on to talk about philology, so that I had to look that up. It's the study of language in oral and written historical sources, and it is the intersection of textual criticism, literary criticism, history, and linguistics. So humanists rejected the contents of medieval scholarly books, both aesthetically and philologically. And there were people called auctorites of the medieval scholarly world, and they were responsible for, I guess, producing texts. And they divided model copies of standard texts into something that was called Picea, which were segments that scribes could rent out one by one so that they could reproduce text quickly and uniformly. And these texts were often produced in 2 columns, written in formal Gothic script. And a lot of times they had official commentary on the sides that were written in a smaller script. And these books basically repelled the Renaissance scholars and humanists who thought this to be like a visual and intellectual distortion of their own content. So the humanists saw Gothic script as the representation of Gothic ignorance, which they thought was like ugly, stupid, impenetrable. And Petrarch said that he hated the tiny and compressed characters that the scribe himself would be unable to decipher, and said that when a reader buys one of these books, they're buying blindness along with it. So in the early 15th century, there were these 2 people that created a new type of script that was rounded, elegant, and minuscule, and they considered to be more classical than the Gothic. So some people learned to draw capital letters in a symmetrical and grandiose style from Roman inscriptions, while others, like these 2, invented their own sort of cursive. And these kinds of, this way of writing or the cursive could be used for less formal purposes, like compilations of notebooks. You were able to fit more text into less space than the standard humanist script. And these scripts were slowly over time taught to other scholars and eventually to professional scribes. So this ended up reaching the canonical form in writing books, and it was adopted across Europe. And basically humanist manuscripts were produced to be used diversely. So there were also smaller, less formal books where the text covered the whole page, and it became the core element in humanist collections. Along with the books, private and public libraries vastly changed. So changed from dark rooms and were replaced by large open rooms, lighted by windows, and decorated with small classic jewel boxes. And basically these were designed to facilitate study and conversation. There was this quote that I liked that said, "Sometimes the encounters between new readers and the newly available texts burst the formal boundaries of traditional learning. Humanist reading took place in settings even more unexpected than Machiavelli's Spring." So basically, in the 15th century, there was, I guess, this culture of like boasting about the prominent places that books and reading were held, like the place that books and reading held in a person's life. And many figures, when they were painted, they wanted to be seen reading books or folios. So that kind of speaks to the value of reading at the time. And there's this idea of like being seen as reading the right book. And as printed books replaced manuscripts, the new form of books and new experiences of reading took over the world of European learning. So typeface of learned printers reproduced the scripts of scribes and artists, sometimes detail by detail. So for example, one of the earliest classical texts produced by, I guess, this publishing company that's quite old, they were already using a humanistic typeface. So that speaks to how the valued typeface at the time and the way books were produced, how they were changing. And there was this idea that classical text deserved a classical presentation. And with the printed book as opposed to the manuscript, it was able to be used in a wider range of settings and activities than the manuscript. And someone wrote that your books, speaking about the printed books, so like the books that we know now, your books, which are so handy that I can use them while walking and even so to speak, have become a special delight to me. The history of the book suggests that Renaissance humanists encountered the classics in a new and more direct way. So historians agree that even the purest humanistic manuscripts and printed books were not the revival of something old, but the invention of something new. So basically, historians now, I guess they would say that humanistic or humanist books are anything but classical. The components of these books included classical elements, but they were applied to new forms. So for example, something called epigraphical capitals that came to define titles, headings, and lists of contents. What else? It goes on to talk, so basically it goes on to talk about like little details about the design and features of the book. So it talks about like the italic script and the floral illumination of the first pages of books made Renaissance books more attractive. And scribes and printers tried to produce texts that looked classical to their readers. Humanists continued to use books that weren't set out in the new form. Some medieval texts were equipped with illustrations where the characters wore a modern dress meant for courtly people rather than learned readers. So, and I think these illustrations are referring to like the frontispiece and like the images within the book. And I guess basically those images dictated who the target audience of these books were. There was a simultaneous desire to bring the ancient world up to date and reconstruct it as it was in medieval and Renaissance conventions. And in 1481, this person named Petrucci joined classical style and classical content in a copy of Aesop made for someone's court. So basically he makes this book for this person of his court, and he combines, I guess, different styles of book forms, and like I think he combines various book cultures. So yeah, I think it says something about like combining influence from Latin and Greek texts. So what else? It says in other places, medieval and Renaissance vernacular and Latin traditions converged to create completely new forms. So it seems like it was a time where there was a lot of invention in terms of bookmaking and writing. This says, I like this quote as well. It says, like the interpreters, in short, the bookmen did not experience or present the ancient world as it really was. They recreated it in images that they found coherent and pleasing. So basically the work of these interpreters and bookmen created an aesthetic revolution in the creation of literary texts. And going back to the beginning of the reading, Machiavelli's two ways of reading his classics, which were like octavo love poets and grand folio statesmen, speak to the economics and aesthetics of Renaissance publishing. And it goes on to talk about like how books were produced and who produced them. So it says that entrepreneurs and merchants hired and instructed the scribes, typesetters, and illuminators that produced the books. And those that were in control of the economics of publishing had a lot to do with the book production. And this is true both for the age of the printed books and the age of the manuscripts that came prior. But in that same vein, customers were able to shape the products that they bought, and therefore bookmen like wanted to supply the demand. And many historians base the transformation of the world of books by printing on the Industrial Revolution. So basically this like craft system of production where each book is designed and executed for a single customer was replaced by industrial systems of mass production. And this idea of artisanal techniques of the scribes were replaced, which like now you wouldn't really see besides for people who are really adamant about like book production and really care about that. So another quote that I liked, it says that the reader now confronts not a warmly personal object whose script, illuminations, and binding he has chose, but a coldly impersonal one whose physical form has been determined in advance by others. So there were stationers and then these people called cartolai. I'm assuming they did the same thing as stationers of Renaissance Italy that stood between ancient authors and modern readers. So they dominated the production and sale of manuscript books in the early 15th century. And after 1450, they often collaborated with and sometimes became printers. So now books were being produced on a grander scale, and this is what they worked on. So they would buy like large supplies of paper or vellum, and vellum is like animal skins that you would use for book production. And they hired scribes and illuminators and chose the texts that the craftsmen would work on. And they would often produce multiple copies of individual works so that they could stock their shop. And basically, cartolai were responsible for ordering the architectural frontispiece of the great Renaissance manuscripts in like places like Urbino and elsewhere. So again, these are like just images of authors, scholars, and patrons that are carefully posed in classical settings, and they're put on the front of the book. And then there were other forms of decoration that were produced wholesale and I guess cheaper and more mass-produced. So there were a lot of mass-produced frontispieces that were called bianchi girari. And then it goes on to talk about this guy named Vespasiano for like a few pages, basically talking about his memoirs and how they revealed a lot about the attitudes of the bookman. And his beliefs were that it was the responsibility of bookmen to spot potential bestsellers, and that it was up to him and other cartolai to change the course of the career of a book or an author by spotting their talents. So yeah, there were editors and printers, and they imitated cartolai by putting out limited editions printed on vellum, as well as larger ones on paper for the ordinary market. They would hire skilled illuminators for special customers, and intermediaries conditioned their customers so that they took more seriously. They took books more seriously and to treat them a certain way. And basically, they did this. They made this clear by, I guess, or they made clear that the physicality of books told a story about its contents and its intended audience by, I don't know, using special bindings or whatever, like paying attention to how the book is made. Yeah, and there's like, I guess, this argument that a well-educated reader wouldn't buy just like a ready-made book, but instead they would want to have it personalized, and that like a good quality book has like durable binding material and certain designs or whatever to make it more personalized. And and sometimes people even got like famous artists to design traceries for the leather covered boards that protected the books, or they would use patterns from ancient coins and metals. They might like put the owner's name or initials or even a motto of theirs in the front. So all of these are classicizing ornaments, trying to kind of replicate classic books and modernize that in a way, I guess. Sorry, there's just so much. I don't want to like go through it all. And also, so the cartolai developed what is still the dominant attitude of the rare book trade now. So sellers and buyers agree that the transfer of books is an important, valuable activity, both culturally and financially, which requires also almost the same level of taste and knowledge as writing the books. And Renaissance readers would take their book purchases very seriously. So inside they would like write the places, dates, circumstances of acquisition, and would often write partial diaries in the margins or the end papers of the books. And in a way, this is like them writing themselves into the book. So for example, Petrarch used many of his like most loved books as a diary, and I guess he would write about his lover or like just even things like his day. But now these things are so these specific books are so valued because it has his personal notes in them. So humanist books originated in mass production, but eventually they went through a transformation and took on individual form as the owner fused his own vision with that of the individual who produced the book. So basically that means that someone would buy a book that's been mass produced, but they might personalize it through writing their notes or putting their name on it or changing the binding, whatever. So I guess this book the books at the time would take on various forms. And it was talking about how now we just accept books in the form that they come. So they're just mass produced and we buy them and that's it. And at the time, humanists trained many to see ancient literature on the page as a script for an oral performance, one that required memorization and articulation, which we've talked about a lot. So in the 15th and 16th centuries, the oral qualities of a written text would remain central to how people would encounter and approach text. There was this quote that I liked. It said, meter, alliteration, particularly striking combinations of sound became the landmarks of a text mapped out orally rather than visually. The humanist met the text most intimately, not as he interpreted the words on paper or vellum, but as he rolled their sound sensuously between his lips. And so I guess at this time, or in the 16th century now, books for schools were being printed with like a metal bar between each line so that people could write notes as the teacher spoke or whatever. So you see this culture of like, I guess, active reading becoming even more valued and not just like skimming through something, but really showing that like you've used the book and you're taking in information and creating new ideas from it. And sometimes texts were even broken up to hundreds of smaller segments so that each segment could be discussed independently. So that really speaks to how people really wanted to read intentionally. And there was this idea of like reading for application, so putting the text to use in your real life. And then I guess reading was kind of a social activity. So it was basically like a collaboration in digesting and processing the classical text for reuse and application to real life. Sometimes humanists would transform the texts that weren't easily manageable into smaller bits of information for maybe noblemen or princes, clerics, whatever. And so as ancient texts multiplied, and I think that means just like became more accessible, and the question of how to read them increased, scholars looked for ways to provide elaborate arts of reading. So for example, there was someone named John Bodine who encouraged his students to make their own anthology instead of providing them with one. And basically what he believed was that history was philosophy taught by concrete examples. So the humanists packaged ancient texts in two ways. First, by the early 16th century, they removed many of medieval commentaries they disliked from distribution, but replaced them with modern ones. So basically, all these texts had all these notes in them. And I guess as we're moving from the medieval to the humanist, they wanted to update them and modernize these comments within the books. And there was this idea that the more important the author and the subject, the more commentary the book was expected to have. there was this other quote that says, "The humanist commentary became the warrant that a text belonged to the high culture of its day. It also linked that text as firmly as the glosses of a Curtius had to a specific literary and pedagogical regime." So basically, reading in the Renaissance was an activity that was governed by a complex code of rules, and it demanded continual attentiveness. So, like reading with a pen in your hand, for example. And sometimes there was no choice but to read with a pen or to be actively reading, because sometimes the only way to obtain a book was to read it was to copy it. So a lot of times the humanists and the Cartuli would copy their texts as often as they had bought them. And sometimes these texts would be copied to be edited. And the purpose of editing by some of these people would be to then write their own book about like I guess a response to these texts or their ideas as a result of whatever text they're writing about. And it says, this other quote, "The humanists created in their books a record of their own intellectual development as well as that of the literary circles they moved in." So their notes in these books were written in a way that seemed to consider that they seem to consider the notes of like a permanent value. And there was this idea that maybe the libraries that had these sorts of books that were annotated and had marginalia in it, maybe they were systematically assembled by people, not really with the purpose of publishing, but more so as a common reference for members of their circle and their friends. There's this other quote that said, "Evidently then, reading in the Renaissance had something of the expensively dramatic quality that writing now possesses. The sophisticated writer needed a set of elaborate machines, and once in possession of them, he enjoyed the same advantage or feeling of advantage over lesser readers that the possessor of the most up-to-date computer and printer now possesses." So at the time, reading was, I guess, directed to political and intellectual ends. So again, going back to the idea of like reading intentionally, and I guess that's what speaks to them taking notes and really trying to absorb the information that they're reading. But eventually, the age of mathematics replaced the age of philosophy and humanism. And then this last quote that I have is, "Even if Latin erudition was on the wane, fine printing, fine binding, and humanistic ways of reading could be transferred to the new vernacular classics of the day." All right, I'm finally done. Do any of you have questions? Any questions
Like, I don't really have
about the text?
I don't really have a question, but like, you know,
Or
the
comment?
parts, yeah, you know, the parts where it was describing how they really cared about like having these customized artisan made books.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't stop like help but think about like imagine buying books for clout.
Did you say for clout?
Yeah, because like that's what they were doing, right? Like they
That's hilarious.
like it was talking about how they wanted to be seen reading the right
Yeah,
book.
basically, it's like a status thing where.
And then like if you were wealthy, you get these custom books made, like, and then you walk around with your custom books. Like,
I would love that. I wish we did that now. Yeah, it was like some people had books
like
with like purple velvet and like
yeah, like imagine
gold detailing.
imagine like flexing on your friends because you got this like custom made book.
I wish.
I'm sorry, that was just like really funny to me.
No, it is funny. I mean, that's essentially what the whole reading was about. So.
Yeah. Like, have you guys seen like this movie American Psycho?
Oh no,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Okay, like there's this scene where this group of like Wall Street businessmen just like flexes on each other based on their business cards.
Oh, that's funny.
Like based on like the texture, the color, like the print, the font, you know, like
Basically the same thing.
yeah. Just haven't changed.
Really. Any other comments or questions? I have one question or a few questions, kind of. There are multiple questions, but they can be talked about at the same time. So if no one has one, I'll say it.
Yeah, I have no questions.
Okay.
I'll just think of it.
Yeah. Well, okay. Based off of his or our professor's criticism, he says he doesn't want to, or we link it too much to the present. But that's essentially what my question does, so I'm gonna ask it anyway. I guess when I was reading this, I was thinking a lot about the idea of like, depending on what individual is using this book or putting themselves in the book by writing the notes, there's a certain value attributed to the book, but that kind of seems to only depend on who is the person that we're talking about. So with people like Petrarch, I can imagine a book with his notes in it is like astronomically expensive, but there are probably so many other books by just regular people that wanted to learn and engage with literature that had all these notes, and they're like not considered valuable. So I don't really know how to ask the question, but basically my question is about like what do you guys think about the way the books are valued depending on who was using them, and how that translates to now, where like when you buy a book, do you feel like it's more valuable because they have certain like notes or a name in it, or is it devalued? Is it more valuable if it's like, say, a famous person that wrote a note in it, like the author themselves, or maybe that's too big of like a friend of the author? Yeah, basically I was just thinking a lot about the value related to the way books are used and who's using them. Very long way to ask that. It's not even a direct question, but if you guys have any ideas.
So let me ask to see if I understand it right. So you want to know if like now we value books based on like who is using them, like they used to do?
I'm just like asking multiple questions, like thinking about the value of books now based on notes and who wrote the notes and how they're used, and the value then of having personalized books and being able to get these books that have notes in them from famous individuals, and just general ideas about like value related to like the interaction with books and the notes and all that. Horribly asked, but
I guess now, like, if a book has like notes written on it, but like unless the notes are written by, I don't know, like some like famous scientist or like philosopher or something, like if I like buy a book and like write notes on it, it would just like devalue the book a little bit, because maybe a lot of people don't want to have a book that has like my notes on it. Maybe they don't want to know my opinion unless it's like someone important's opinion. I think we don't value it as much.
I guess so. If I explain what I'm thinking, maybe it'll make more sense. But I just think it's interesting to think about how, like, for example, when I go buy a book, or even like a textbook off someone else, if I see that they have their own notes in them, and in my head I'm like, oh, this book is devalued. But like that would obviously be different if they were someone else. It's just that, like, I have this concept of like, I feel like it ultimately goes down to like, oh, this person's ideas are not valuable or worthy because they're not well known, or like they're not a famous scholar or whatever. But like I think it's interesting how back then there was such a deep value in really engaging with books and showing that you did, and multiple people having notes in these books, and like it's basically like having conversations through these books, whether it's like with each other, people reading, or the authors. I think it's just cool how there's like this interaction that takes place on the page that people were able to see through these notes. Whereas now, like, people don't do that. People don't even really write notes when they read, I feel like. Yeah, I guess I was thinking about this idea of like reading intentionally and what that means as well. Yeah. So it's all over the place, but if anyone has any ideas.
I think like when you read, you should always kind of have your own like commentary on it, whether or not you write it out anyways, right? It's just it's like it's good to do. But you know, unfortunately, like normal people, like most people probably don't care about your commentary.
Yeah,
So,
right.
but it is still like I think that humanist idea of like reading with intention is still like relevant today. Like you do need to read with, I mean, you do need to make your own understanding when you read something, right? Like I don't think like sorry, for personal reading, I think it hasn't lost its value. But like in terms of like commercial value, like unless you're famous, I don't think it would have been that valuable even back then, right?
It seems like there would have been commercial value though, because they were talking about certain scholars and how, or I guess maybe the value is more about the value now, where I don't know, these books are probably
maybe
really
like
expensive.
maybe I think now it's probably more valuable because you get like insights on how scholars thought back then.
Yeah, I guess it's like a historical insight.
And even back then, like I would assume you'd still have to be like a scholar or like somewhat of an intellectual to actually have like your notes published, right?
Right. Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Like if you saved up like from the other two texts, like if you saved up half of your paycheck to buy a book, I don't think your notes are
Yeah.
yeah, like I don't think most people will really care about your notes.
It'd be kind of nice. Well, I guess reading this now, I'm like thinking of I don't know, paying attention to that more when I look at like used books and stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like like people still do it today, right? Like you like highlight books or like you copy down like a really like a quote that you really like, and then you post it on Instagram. Like that's just what people do. Like
yeah. Or this is like not really off topic, but there was once this book that I saw, and the only reason I bought it was because of something that was in the book. It's kind of sad. It said that I can't believe how unhappy I am. It's really depressing. But I thought that was just so interesting that someone wrote that in there. And like when I bought it, I was like, oh, I wonder where they are and how they are and who they are. So it's, I don't know. I think it's cool to think about the ways that this is getting off the topic, but that you can like connect with people through something that like you just because you both make contact with this item.
and like your commentary would be subjective to yourself, right? Like it's like you're under like what you took out from the book is probably different from someone else.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess like it is valuable in that like it gives you another perspective.
Yeah, I agree.
But again, like I don't know if a book that is commented with commentary by like just some like
Okay,
university student is gonna be that successful, you know.
who knows? Maybe there's genius ideas in there. Now I'm thinking like maybe I missed out on a lot of interesting ideas by overlooking those notes. I guess another question. It's not really like a serious question, but I was just curious, like, how do you guys feel about writing in books? So, do you guys like underlining and like making notes? Do you like write your name in the book, or
Oh,
do you have?
I would prefer
Yeah.
not to even crease my book.
Okay, see,
Like
and that was I was gonna say, do you believe in this idea that the book should be like pure and as clean as possible?
I just have like mild OCD, so like I just like everything like crisp and clean.
Yeah, that makes
I'm
sense.
like the opposite. I like stuff like worn in and like writing in it and putting my name on it. It like adds character, you know, and like history. I don't know. Like
Yeah, definitely. Like your history is now part of the book in a way. Yeah, I think I'm a bit of both. Like I used to really like the idea of marking it as like mine, but then I feel like now I think a lot about like, oh well, what if I keep this book for a long time and like it's a special book, let's say not first edition, but something like that, and I don't want to devalue it by like writing a note in it or something, because maybe one day this book will have value. But then at the same time, like I do like underlining quotes I like, and I don't really write notes, but I do have a friend, for example, who will write a lot, and like that's just how she reads. So yeah.
I think when I was just like reading books, I was more of like keeping it on the clean side, but nowadays I just like read on my iPad. So in that case, I like underline and like add my own comments and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when I'm dealing with like a physical book, I think I like it cleaner.
Do you know why like there's that difference between the physical and the like on the computer?
I honestly think I feel like iPad, I could always erase it, right? But like on a book, I'm a bit more like careful with it because like I don't really want to wreck it as much as I like it.
That makes sense.
Unless you go to like I like everything to be just clean, but like there is a sense of like there's just like a special feeling when you go to like those old bookstores and like the pages are all like soft
Yeah, definitely.
and there's like that book smell. But I don't know, like I've never written in my books before, so I don't even know like what it's like to like write on your book as you go.
Right.
So I don't know, I can't really relate, to be honest.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just kind of curious about this idea of like, does a book have to be kept pure and it's only pure if it's like untainted, or is it more pure if it's been used and interacted with and written in? So yeah, I don't know if those were really questions, but they were like ideas that I had. Honestly, I can't really think of other questions for this.
Do you think like maybe like our textbooks are just like do textbooks count as like commentary?
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking about that too.
Yeah, so when there are like textbooks published by different publishers, or like, you know, written or translated by different people, are valued more because, you know, people judge them to be better,
I actually didn't
right?
know that.
Like sometimes when you look up like a certain um like a certain textbook, like a textbook for a certain subject, like I'm pretty sure there is a preference in that community for like a certain like that one or two textbook that people consider to be better than the other ones, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think today there's that that uh that value with the commentary it still exists. Just it still depends on who is providing the commentary, right?
Right. I guess like this conversation, because if we're gonna like try to link it to other time periods, um, I guess for most of our conversations, what stands out to me a lot is this idea of like privilege and value. So for this discussion, like there's this idea of certain people's thoughts are more privileged and valued. And then when we had like our first conversation, we talked about how when books first were introduced, there was like privilege again had a role to play in how people interacted with books because only certain people had access to them. Yeah, I noticed that come up a lot where, and I guess that's kind of inevitable because everything is linked to that, but it's interesting to see that appear even with something as simple as like a book.
Mm.
Any other ideas?
Like, do you think in a way this like humanist era kind of just really just modernized how books are consumed today?
In
Because
what sense?
I feel like when it describes how like it's becoming more commercialized, it's kind of like the beginning of what we know as like print culture, or like just reading culture.
Right. Yeah, I guess so. I didn't really get from text. I don't know if humanists were involved in how the actual, or like I feel like that maybe more so relates to the invention of the ability for mass production. Or
Well, like
I mean, because I know they had a big part to play in a lot of ways.
they also like fixed a lot of the layouts and like the
Okay.
you know, adding like illustrations, right?
Right,
Like
I see what you mean.
it's kind of like the beginning of like what's like it's like their version of the book is really similar to what we know.
Right, I guess
Compared
I get what you
to
mean. Yeah.
like compared to before,
Right.
it still seemed kind of like different in a way.
Yeah, I guess they elevated this idea of like the design and presentation and not perfecting it, but making sure that every detail is accounted for. Whereas I guess before it was just like sheets of paper that were a manuscript, and if you wanted to, you could bind them or not.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, because now like design's such a big part of book production.
And like that previous point from the other reading about the overload of print culture. I guess like when you make your book more visually appealing from like the outside, it's easier for people to be attracted to it and like pick it up and
Right.
and that be like more interested in reading it, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I even thought it was interesting that like the pictures that they put in the book were meant to attract certain people and
Yeah.
like little details. It's like the birth or not. It's like marketing without having, you know, what we would have now with like a whole design team and like creative directors and marketing. Um, I don't know. Oh. So but the readings for this class is interesting for me, and it can be hard to come up with questions because like I've never thought about these things. I guess like just thinking about books in such depth, not even actual what's in the book, but just the book itself. Like it feels repetitive, but I know it's not.
Well, it's like the it's like the history, right?
Yeah, it's essentially just the history.
So of course there's gonna be, you know, parts that seem repetitive.
Yeah.
But like I mean we also see some change, right? Like at when we first started the meeting, like we were still talking about like religion
Hmm.
and like now we get to the humanist part and it's like about like it feels like it's not about religion at all anymore.
Hmm. True. I just didn't notice that.
I don't think it ever was about religion, essentially. I think that like religious people kind of forced themselves on it for a long time. And then like by
Well,
time they had less power, so it got free of that force and became what it was supposed to be.
hmm. I feel
And
like one of the main sources of like why books even came to be is because like religions wanted to have their or people wanted to have their religion be uh, in books and text,
yeah,
kind of. Yeah. So
It's easier to spread.
yeah, for sure. You access more people that way, I guess. Any other questions or comments? Or not even about this reading, but maybe the other two.
Oh, and it's also like kind of so in the other two readings like printing it's and bookmaking is like really restrict like there's like kind of like a monopoly on that, right?
yeah,
Mm.
But in the humanistic one like they're making it like by hand or like they're making like their own books, I guess, in a way,
Mm-hmm.
like independently.
Right.
So maybe that's that also contributes to like you know, before I would assume like the church and what like the printing process had some kind of like a connection, right? So because they were mostly producing like religious texts, right?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the humanistic readers came along, I mean the humanists came along, like uh it kind of just took it out of um that like centralized uh what's the word, that like monopoly on the book production, right?
Mhm.
I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Do you guys like how much do you guys think that the whole like the church and the whole like religious monopoly actually like contributed to like books and print culture? Because like I think whenever we're talking about religion, we're talking about it in a like negative light. Like we're like, yeah, they controlled this, they limited that, but like I think they also had some positive
Yeah,
effects
see,
on like
like that's the part that I was kind of struggling. Like, I don't know, because they never made clear that they had a monopoly on that, right? I'm just speculating. Like, it could
actually
totally.
in one of the I think in the first reading that I had, it
Uh,
specifically said that they did have a monopoly on it, and it started to end by the 16th century.
okay, well, there's
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So they did do that, but I guess I don't know. Like, it. I would assume if most of your people are religious, they would want religious text, right?
Yeah.
But like, for them to have been religious in the first place is because it was spread. So like, I don't know. Like, I'm not. I don't think religion is bad at all. But like, yeah, like I don't think it's bad, but I don't know, like in the context of these readings, it does like sound like it's kind of controlling, you know?
I think it kind of depended on like what religious group had the most power at the time, because like if the power was at the hands of like people who had like extreme beliefs and like wanted to control everything, it was like more controlling at that time. And then like when time passed and the power was like mm, with people who had like more secular views, they had like less control.
Oh, I think my sorry, like I think my problem was like is it the like did the chicken come first or did the egg come first? Like because I
What's the chicken and what's the egg here?
like it's like so I guess the chicken is like the religious text
Mm-hmm.
and the egg are like the religious people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like before the like religious texts were even printed, there were probably already religious people, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So do you think like it's just the population pushing for more religious content, or do you think it's like due to that monopoly that the reading was talking about, you know? Like that's what I was like struggling with.
I think
I
your
think.
question is kind of like similar to mine, and that the one that I asked, like, how much did it like positively contributed to the whole like book or publishing and stuff? And I think like I think it was a little bit of both of what you said, so that there were like a lot of religious people and they wanted to like read the Bible and like learn more about their beliefs, and they were kind of pushing it. But then the religious people who were at power kind of took advantage of that and kind of wanted to like control the whole system by like restricting it to like religious books or texts. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I
like
think it's like
I
a
don't know
mix of
either.
both. Yeah, like, well, from what I know, like, I think the Bible is like the oldest text in the world. I think so. Like the
Isn't it like,
Gutenberg Bible and stuff, like that was the first text ever printed, and like before that, it was just like manuscripts. So like, since that existed first, people probably like the people came after that, you know. So I think because of those people, more religious texts were made from that one text. And so I'm just guessing here that the text probably did come first, but it was the people in power that like
kept it that way?
spread it. Yeah.
And
I
I'm
think
kind of thinking that, sorry, maybe people at that time, like, I mean, like very early on, maybe they didn't even thought of like other types of text. And then when it came along, they were like, oh, I can also like read novels or like journals or like this and that. And that's cool. And I enjoy it. Maybe they wouldn't even think of it. So that like, so that they wouldn't even want it. Maybe like that. I don't know.
um sorry, what
Um,
Oh yeah.
I'm pretty sure
Oh sorry.
so, I'm pretty sure like the Bible is one of those really like, yeah, maybe printed wise, like it's the first or it's the oldest one, but I'm pretty sure like there were other texts before that. So I don't know, um
Okay.
like
I just looked it up. The first book was the Gutenberg Bible, apparently.
Yeah,
it is
that's the
Bible.
first printed book. But then
So,
before
yeah.
that, like it was on manuscript.
Oh,
I don't know.
okay.
Yeah. Like no one really knows what the first manuscript is because like that's like all over
yeah,
the world. But the Bible is
like
like one of the oldest, like for
like
sure.
if I remember from my old Sunday school days, wasn't like the first few chapters, I mean the first few books like written by Moses or something.
Yeah.
So like I'm pretty sure there were older texts than that, but
Probably.
like printing wise, yes. Like I think like even now I think like the Bible is one of the most like best
The
selling.
most
Yeah.
popular. Yeah.
So obviously it's
But
still very popular, but
mhm.
like yeah, I just don't know like do you like did the like obviously the printed text helped the religion like the various religions to spread, right?
Right.
But when we talk about like this monopoly of printing and book producing, like is that a result of like people wanting that, or is it this kind of like negative thing that we always talk about?
I think it's a good thing because like I think in the Altic, however you say his name, in that reading there was like a line that said um I don't know, something about it's like imaginative and something like appeal. And so like since like the Bible is so like diverse, like there's like different ways of writing and stuff, and like it's really, I don't know how to describe it, like very like there's a large variety, right, of
Mm-hmm.
like different styles and like different like stories and stuff. And so like from that people took like inspiration and like wrote other stories or other like commentaries or whatever, right? So I think having that basis of like the Bible, like that influenced so much more. So in that light, I think it's very positive and it did enrich in like the reading community, I guess.
yeah, like I agree, but I think what I'm kind of more asking about is like uh hold on, give me a second. Cause like Nagin said, like it seems like we always talk about religion, like at least from our conversation so far, like we kind of see it as like this overseer that's kind of controlling everything. But like I don't think that's completely true either. So I'm just trying to see if there's like a like an explanation as to why it was even like monopolized in the first place. Do you see
Mm-hmm.
what I'm asking?
Mm-hmm.
Like how did that even happen?
Mm, I
I
guess the
wonder if,
simplest answer is like the people, right? The people in power. Because like the one figure I can think of is like Constantine, and like he was like the first like emperor of Rome to like kind of accept Christianity, and like he he's the one who said like no, it's okay to practice it and stuff, because like at that time a lot of people were like persecuted for it, and so he's the one that was like okay, like that's like we can practice Christianity, it's okay. And like he's the one who like ordered like I think 50 Bibles to be made. So like I think that influenced the spread of it the most. So it's definitely the people, I think. Like it depends on who was in power, right? But we already like kind of said that. So
Yeah. So like what I'm getting from is just like for the people it's like this positive thing, but it seems like in the hands of like a politician it becomes like a really just kind of negative thing, you know?
right.
So
Yeah. I guess that's why we have separation of church and state.
okay, so we talked about religion, business, uh the humanists. Is there anything else we can talk about for culture?
Mm.
I just wanted to add something else. I think like if you want to like find the complete answer to your question, we gotta also look at how literacy and book culture and book publishing, how the history of this happened in the East, because like all we focusing on is what happened in the Western world, and Western world is like so influenced by Christianity that like every historical thing that you're looking at is tied to Christianity. So maybe if we look at what happened, like for example in China, maybe we would see if they also took like maybe like religion was also an important part of like what happened there, or maybe it wasn't, and maybe we can compare that like how this whole like journey happened.
Yeah. And I mean, like from our readings from like the weeks before, uh like in a way reading religious texts kind of boosted like people reading at home, even though somehow it didn't exactly increase literacy. It was encouraging people to like and there's that part about how like mothers read to their children at home.
Yeah.
So like it's not completely negative. Of course, there's always positives.
Mm-hmm.
But like now that I think like when I think about like Eastern religions, there's no like it doesn't feel like there's as much of a centralized like one singular religion at like Europe has Christianity and Catholicism. The Middle East has
Mhm.
Islam, but
Don't they
like
have Buddhism? Or
yeah they do, but like it's not like not everyone is Buddhist.
yeah.
Yeah, or like sorry, like nobody anywhere is like not everyone is that thing, right? But like it feels like there's no like predominant religion when we talk about like Eastern culture. At least maybe not. Actually, I'm probably talking about like modern times, but back then maybe there was. Because I know like in China there's like Taoism and Buddhism and like there's like Confucianism. There's like a whole bunch of stuff that people kind of fuse together, and like there's not like one exact way or like one exact religion. So oh, and like Asia, like in ancient times, they kind or like in the around the time that we're talking about, like they were still kind of under like dynastic rule, right? So like there wasn't really like a church state or like a state like it was just the king.
Right.
Yeah.
So like it was a monopoly either way, like
Yeah.
religious or not.
Right.
So
Yeah.
like so I guess it wouldn't
True.
really apply, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just different cultures. But like is there any more we can talk about for the print culture? Because I feel like like we
Played
barely,
a little.
we barely talked about it.
Yeah.
I don't know. hard to question because like even the reading itself was kind of, there was no like direct clear answer, you know. And like even in the slideshows or like the PowerPoint, it was like talking about how it's not like a set thing. It's just kind of, what was it, like an umbrella term? Like it's just, I don't know.
When I read the reading, like I had the feeling that he really wanted to differentiate between the different types of print culture. But when I was reading it, like I don't know, like it felt like he was just talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
So like I didn't really see that like distinction between the four definitions.
Right.
I think that the same. I think the definitions were like a little bit confusing, all of them,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and like I prefer to have like 4 different readings on each of them so that I would like actually understand them, because like I guess like the definition that we have in our mind on print culture is more about how it's distributed, like where we buy it, like those kind of things. I guess that's in my mind, but the other 3 that it mentioned, like I don't know.
Because I think it's more of just like a separation between like print culture, the production side of it, and print culture, the content side of that. I can see why those two are different.
Yeah.
But
And like I think the last section was like about like what happens after it. So like it like talked about how reading is like an open, what is it, like an open cycle? Like it doesn't end. Like, you
Oh
know,
yeah, it said that it's a cycle, and the cycle doesn't have a beginning or an end, and
right.
it's
And
just
so
like
like
continuously going.
that continued like leadership, authorship. I forgot
Authorship,
what
yeah.
it's called. So like authorship, yeah. That's also like part of print culture, but like I see how those differ, but like I don't know, like it's all related and
yeah, like
all
for me,
connected.
for me, I feel like the point about the consciousness and like the social relationship, and then the last part is kind of just about the content,
Yeah.
whereas the communication is just about like the distribution and like the more like production side of it. But like everything else just seemed really similar to each other.
Yeah, right. I think in like, what is it? SNC 228, we learned this like thing. What is it called? I forgot what it's called, but it's just basically like the cycle of like books, I guess. And like this is exactly pretty much what we learned. So like how it goes from um like the author to like the publisher to like printer, the shippers, the booksellers, readers, and like it's just this continuing like cycle. So isn't that like pretty much what print culture That's just
I think so, except
general.
yeah, I think so, except in this case, this guy's implying that that leads to the reader to become an author themselves.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying, right?
Hmm.
But
I guess that's what he's saying, but like it doesn't mean that every reader would become an author. Like,
mhm.
yes, like
It's very
very
like.
few. Yeah.
Hmm.
Or maybe you become an author yourself by writing those notes or commentary.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
I don't know, I can't really think of anything else.
In the reading, there's this line that says, "Print authorship cannot be accounted for from within print culture." Um, why is that?
Wait, repeat that.
It says, "Print print authorship cannot be accounted for from within print culture."
Isn't it part of the cycle that it explained?
Right? I thought it was, but I guess not. Why is that?
Wait, what? Print authorship
Cannot
cannot come
be
from
accounted
print?
for. Yeah, yeah.
I don't quite understand that question.
Yeah, me neither.
Me too. I thought it was like part of like the consumption cycle,
I
not
guess
like the consumption part, but
yeah, it is. I think it's the next step after the consumption,
mhm.
because like
So,
exactly after the sentence, the next paragraph starts with print authorship as it emerges from this fourth stage. So it emerges from consumption.
yeah, but why isn't it a part of it?
It also says that like authorship has like different types, like scribal, oral, and theatrical. So like I guess oral authorship is when we read something and then we talk about it, like we're doing right now.
I guess so.
And I guess I do understand that how what we're doing right now wouldn't be a part of the print culture, or would it be?
I think it would be.
I feel like it would be, but it's saying it's not.
I mean, I think it would be, but like we're not like contributing that much to the actual like book. Like we're not
Yeah,
writing
but
it,
like,
we're not like distributing it, we're not printing it, we're just reading it and then like talking about it.
but the purpose of making the books is so that people have conversations. So
Right.
we're
Yeah.
also engaging with the book,
Yeah.
even if it's not ever recorded and
Yeah.
remembered. Even it's still part of the culture.
I guess so. I don't know what the sentence means really.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's just because like print is just referring to like the visual or like the physical aspect of text. So maybe that's why like conversation doesn't count.
Did we like try to figure out more questions or just end the conversation here? It doesn't seem like any of us know what to say.
I'm thinking, but like I really cannot think of anything else to ask. I feel like we covered most of like what the readings talked about, but do you guys think it's enough to write down?
I mean, if we want, we can always, because we still have a week left, right? To tell it's due, or not a week, but a few days. So I guess we could always tweak our dossiers before we send it in. Don't know what you guys think.
Um, I think I'm writing it this week, so if someone could give me all the notes, I can try and write it all up by I don't know, like Wednesday or Thursday, and then see
Yeah, I
if
feel like Thursday is
enough.
fine.
Yeah. But if not, we can just take one more day to just come up with random
Well,
stuff.
I'm gonna try to look through the readings from this week and last week, because I don't know if we had enough for last week, but
Yeah.
and come up with questions.
Okay. I will too.
Yeah.
Should we end it here?
Yeah, and Esther, I'll try to get you the notes for this meeting as fast as I can.
Okay.
Same.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Right then.
Okay.
Hope you guys have a good one.